An astonishing molecular machine. Ring species, they still can't make up their minds what killed the dinosaurs, and much more. This is Genesis Week. And welcome to this episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the Origins controversy, made possible by the supporters of Core Ottawa, Citizens for Origins Research and Education, and now carried on the Christianima Network, christianima.com, Christian cinema at its finest. Excellence in pirate broadcasting. We are squatters at the old pod city of Sanji, so we can continue to bring you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear, and giving glory to our creator while doing it. Remember, if you get lost in cyberspace, you can just punch in Wazooloo.com or GenesisWeek.com, and you will find us. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get extras like Crevo Rants and full interviews with our guests. I'm your host, Ian Juby. If you'll recall, in Crevo Rant number 172, Divergent, Convergent, Parallel, Pre-adaptive, Reductive Evolution, I mentioned the bacterial flagellum. Now, this is a fascinating example of a molecular machine. It is essentially an inboard-outboard motor built into bacteria like E. coli, which is a bacteria that lives in your intestine and actually helps you digest your food. Now, they are good for you when they're in your intestine, but if they get in your stomach, that's called E. coli poisoning. I've had it. Don't go there. It's not pretty. It can also kill you. But you know what they say, whatever doesn't kill you only postpones the inevitable. These bacteria swim by spinning their tail. Now, they don't wag their tail, they spin it. Now, because of the structure of the tail, when it is spun, it takes on a corkscrew shape. Now, they will spin their tail blazingly fast, up to 100,000 revolutions per minute, or about 1,600 turns every second. Now, because of this, they can swim up to 10 body lengths per second. They're incredibly fast. Now, how do they do this? Now, to dissect them is incredibly hard to do. They are so small you can't do it with a knife, so they do it with chemicals and try and dissolve specific parts of the bacteria. Now, when we dissect them, we find that they have a miniature motor inside. It's a lot like an electric motor, having all the parts of a motor. The rotor, the stator, the bushing, and the drive shaft. If you know anything about cars, the hook is like the universal joint on a car. It allows the bacteria to bend its tail around a corner and spin it at 100,000 RPM. Now, this motor is a protonic motor, driven by protons, not electrons. Now, the question arises, what could this have evolved from? As Darwin said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. This is good science. He proposed a way in which he could falsify his theory. Now, he said he did not know of any such organ, but that was long before the advent of molecular biology, and his proposal for falsification is perfectly valid. Well, meet the bacterial flagellum, the bane of one small step at a time evolution. If any one of these parts is missing, or not quite evolved, the entire propulsion system breaks down. If the bacteria had not quite evolved the rotor, for example, let's say it had a smaller rotor, well, just like the engines in a car made by Ford or Chevy are remarkably similar, but the sizes and tolerances are not the same. You cannot just simply take a piston out of a Ford engine and put it into a Chevy engine, for example. Well, it's the same idea here. The size of the parts is crucial. And if the rotor is missing parts or even ever so slightly smaller, the protons will drop out from between the rotor and stator, and the motor will not work. Well, let's say it tried to evolve, get bigger and better. If the rotor is just ever so slightly bigger, then it jams against the stator, and once again, the motor does not work. But crucially, if any part is missing, the whole system breaks down. This is the point Dr. Michael Behe made in his book, Darwin's Black Box, in which he coined irreducible complexity. You cannot make the motor any simpler. You cannot reduce its complexity. It will not work. Now, several commenters and skeptics cited the bogus argument against the flagellum's irreducible complexity by pointing to what is commonly called the Type 3 secretion system, or TTSS for short. Now, basically, it's like a flagellum system, but with the tail missing. And the bacteria uses the stub to drill into the membranes of cells and stuff. It's quite a nasty form of bacteria. Nicholas Matzke first proposed the TTSS as the precursor to the flagella way back in 2003. Now, what's interesting to me is that the anti-creationists try and discredit my person all the time on subject matters like this. They will beg of me my qualifications and rant and rave about how a robotics engineer cannot make any intelligent commentary on complex biology, as if my background and training has anything to do at all with whether or not I'm right. They will then turn around and quote Matzke, who at the time was a geography student, making arguments on complex microbiology. Now, the fact that the anti-creationists are so hypocritical and try to pull a ad hominem attack speaks volumes about their inability to adequately respond to the science I cite. They cannot prove me wrong, so they attack me personally instead of the argument. This is called argumentum ad hominem, and it is a fallacy of irrelevance. But let's take a look at Matzke's argument. Has the flagellum been shown to be reducible? Is it possible that the flagellum evolved from this TTS system? No, not at all, for multiple reasons. Let's first use the evolutionary conclusions to see which form of bacteria appeared first. Multiple researchers have concluded that the fully formed flagellar system came about first, and the TTSS system is actually a deteriorated form of the flagellum. In other words, the bacteria lost some of the information on how to build the inboard-outboard propulsion system. But notice the spin put on by those contending this is an example of reducibility. It is missing a part, but is still functional. Not as a propulsion system, it ain't. Let's take my van, for example. I can drive it right across the country, and I can live in it. In fact, I live in it all the time. Now, if I remove one part of the drivetrain, the drive shaft, my van can still be used for a home, but it is useless for transportation, which is what we're talking about when we say irreducibly complex. So even if you wanted to contend that this is an example of reducible complexity, excellent! You've finally provided proof that better things evolve into worse things. The exact opposite of upwards-onwards evolution, which still does not address the question of where did the flagellum come from. Now, let's take a quantum leap in complexity. Just published this past week in PNAS, Ruan et al. Examined a bacteria called MO1, which has 7 flagella enveloped in a sheath. Now, this bacteria can outstrip the already incredible speeds of E. coli by 10 to 1. The research team was wondering how this bacteria could have all its flagellar tails in a sheath, all spinning at the same time with so much efficiency. Well, the designer had a novel solution to keep all the tails spinning in synchronization, using what can only be described as a transmission, apparently composed of some 31 gears. Using a scanning electron microscope and a whole mess of images, the researchers were able to deduce this configuration. This animation is straight off the supplementary information on the PNAS website, which shows what they believe they are seeing. Each of the yellow gears has one of the 7 tails going through its middle. So you are looking down at the cross-section of the tail. The gears keep the tails in synchronization so that even if the tails touch each other, they do not cause resistance or opposite rotating collisions. Remember Darwin's proposed method of falsifying his theory? If any organ can be shown which could not evolve in small, numerous, successive, slight modifications, his theory would be ruined? Well, his theory was ruined with the advent of microbiology, and this particular bacteria is just another example of its ruin. But evolution and creation are mutually exclusive to all other theories. In other words, if one is falsified, there is only one other theory left: creation, which leads us to the question of who is that creator? I would say that creator was none other than Jesus Christ, who performed so many miracles that even his enemies didn't deny it. And he even rose from the dead. The creator of these bacteria blows away our best minds and technologies on planet Earth. If we make a machine that's smaller and more efficient, we call it a higher technology. Well, the technology involved in the design of this bacteria is mind-blowing. These motors are so small, you can fit 8 million of them on the tip of one of your hairs. You have molecular machines on this scale all throughout your body, and you can quickly see why King David said to the Creator, "I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works." I got multiple questions sent in from viewers over the past couple of months regarding ring species, and the shows have been so packed that I had put off responding till now. Corleen wrote in from South Africa. "Good day, Ian. Thank you for the show and the work you are doing. We need more like you. I have a question that came up as I was sharing my belief of a young Earth with my cousin. His response to my point, that animals do not evolve but is able to adapt, was, quote, 'How extreme can this adaptation actually be before it becomes evolution?' End quote. He confirmed that he believes that a horse and a donkey is different, but probably comes from the same kind of animal. However, he claimed, a hyrax and an elephant shares the same DNA, or something, or proof exists that they came from the same animal. I unfortunately didn't know about anything about this hyrax-elephant link. Do you know anything about this? I do not believe in evolution and was wondering, do evolutionists differentiate between adaptation and evolution? And if they do, where do they say does the one stop and the other begin? How far can they push adaptation? How different can animals be but still share the same origin animal? Essentially, what is the difference between evolution and adaptation from a creationist perspective and the evolutionist perspective? Hope I'm expressing myself correctly. Thank you again." Corleen was, indirectly, asking about what is known as ring species and the speciation question. Now, we creationists, of course, do believe in diversification of species. For example, we would say that all dog kinds came from one dog kind, which was taken on board the Ark of Noah. That's right, the wolf, the Great Dane, French Poodle, and Chihuahua all arose from one dog kind, probably something like a wolf. In fact, we can historically track when these different kinds of dogs arose. Why? Because people bred the specific types of dog. Notice what has happened, though. The world's most useless dog, the Chihuahua, wouldn't survive a day in the wild. So it wasn't natural selection that bred the Chihuahua, but rather unnatural or directed selection. People directed the selection. They specifically separated out certain traits and then bred the remaining dogs in order to weed out attributes that they did not want. For example, to breed a Chihuahua, they separated the smaller dogs and smaller from each generation to achieve the ultimate useless dog. Notice what these people did. They removed information and variation from the gene pool. You will not be able to breed a German Shepherd from two Chihuahuas. Why? Because the German Shepherd, while it is a dog, has different genetic information that the Chihuahua no longer has, because that genetic information was methodically removed by people in selective breeding. Now, this is not evolution, though some of the extremist evolutionary camp are trying to redefine different breeds of dogs as different species. This variation within the dogs is variation within the species. Now, you will, however, often see dog variation in textbooks with the implication that if dogs can turn into other dogs with small steps, then surely a cow can turn into a whale in small steps and more time. Now, this is where the alleged relationship between the hyrax and the elephant comes in. They're only considered related depending on who you ask and how they deem them related. Many evolutionists disagree that the hyrax is related to the elephant, but it depends on how you define related. You are related to the whales, because both people and whales are mammals. However, proposing that the hyrax evolved into an elephant, or a cow evolved into a whale, is a radical leap compared to dog evolution. First of all, notice that the breeding of dogs is a reduction in variation, not a gain. It is the opposite of upwards-onwards evolution. To turn a cow into a whale, you have to, somewhere along the line, develop a sonar system that cows don't have. That's a gain of complexity. And such an observation has never been made in all of scientific history, I might add. All we have observed is the loss of genetic information, the loss of organs, functions, limbs, etc. Secondly, the dogs are still dogs. They can breed one with another. Now, this brings us, however, to ring species. Some dogs may technically be able to breed with one another, but it's very difficult to impossible due to the physical variations, for example. A Great Dane and a Chihuahua would have difficulty mating. And so you could consider the Great Dane and the Chihuahua a type of ring species. The most common ring species cited in textbooks has to do with two types of seagull. The different breeds of gulls make a sort of ring around the Arctic where they are found, hence the term ring species. Now, for whatever reasons, be it inability or disinterest between the types of birds, the European herring gull will not breed with the American herring gull. Now, because the basic and common definition of species involves interbreeding, one could classify the European and American herring gulls as separate species, though they are the same bird. So, is this evolution? Well, like with our dogs, we've watched as seagulls have evolved into seagulls. We've watched dogs evolve into dogs. Yes, there's incredible variation, and sometimes even isolation to the point where two kinds won't breed anymore, and you can even call that a different species if you like. But this is no help to upwards-onwards evolution, which requires the gaining of new information, new organs, new skeletal structures, etc. Upwards-onwards evolution, which caused bacteria to turn into university professors. Ring species is not the evolution that is taught to us in school. I go into more definition or more detail in Crevo Rant number 41, Define Evolution. I've had a pile of requests for instant digital downloads of episodes of Genesis Week, Crevo Rants, and the Complete Creation video series. Well, we aim to please. Just please note that I am still adding files. Some are for PC, while others are for your iPod, and you can get most of the videos for cheaper than a coffee at Timmy's. Head on over to ianjuby.tradebit.com. I'm working on getting the files on iTunes as well, but that is not available as of yet. If you'll recall, last week we discussed the mystery question, what was it that killed the dinosaurs, in Crevo Rant number 17. I showed multiple lines of evidence why the evidence most clearly pointed to a flood. Well, just to stir the pot some more, a paper was given this past week at the annual meeting of the American Geophysical Union, contending that it was volcanoes that killed the dinosaurs. Well, getting closer. Notice the history of claims and counterclaims, each of which refutes the other. First, it was an asteroid that allegedly killed the dinosaurs. Then another group contended the dinosaurs killed themselves by farting too much. I'm not making this up. Then another group of scientists argued it was cold that killed the dinosaurs. Now another group is contending it was volcanoes that killed the dinosaurs. Yet when you look at the actual evidence itself, the physical fossil conglomerations, the geomorphology of the dinosaur beds, and provincial, sometimes continental geology, it all screams loudly of a massive flood, global in scale. This evidence is acknowledged indirectly in the research papers and in the museums displaying the dinosaurs. The evidence is easy to interpret. I mean, if you found fossil clams which had been buried alive with the dinosaurs, as well as other marine life like fish, as well as land plants and animals, turtles, etc., all in the same layer, well, what would you conclude buried them? The reason the researchers keep coming up with the wrong model is because they are ignoring the obvious evidence and not allowing an interpretation of a worldwide flood. Question: is that good science to remove the possibility of a worldwide flood without consideration? The correct answer is no. Science follows the evidence wherever it leads. And in this case, it leads clearly to the interpretation of a global flood. And thus, those who believe in deep time will never get the correct answer because they rejected the correct answer out of hand and have continued to seek an alternative explanation, which is wrong. If you have appreciated this program, please remember we are a viewer-supported program. Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation to help keep the program on the air by donating to Core Ottawa. The details for that are at the end of the show. And for those international viewers who still want to support, we can't give you a tax-deductible receipt, but you can make a direct online donation here. And thank you for your support. Give us 30 seconds. We'll be right back with the mailbag.
Funny, fast, and furious. Ian's Crevo rants cover a multitude of topics in an easy-to-understand comical way. Complicated subjects that normally make your brain hurt a lot less when Ian explains them, while wearing his anti-government mind-reading equipment. Have questions about carbon-14 dating, natural selection, thermodynamics, or what on earth is he doing there? 3 volumes of rants on DVD. Take your pick for $15 each, plus shipping and handling, or order all 3 as a package and save yourself $10. Order online today at Ian's Bookstore.
Mail for me? YouTuber Kiwi Frog wrote in, and what about the Lepidodendron known as scale trees? A concentration of these trees is often called a coal forest because they are so large and so dense that they are responsible for the large amounts of coal our Earth contains. There's also been discoveries of fossilized tree trunks and fern-like leaf fossils 100 meters deep within coal mines. A young Earth does not allow time for this to occur and be so deep underground. Thanks for writing in. Actually, Kiwi Frog hit on one of my areas of expertise, as I have studied multiple fossil forests across North America, most of them comprised of these scale trees. And actually, to be more specific, there was actually only about 1,500 to 2,000 years to grow all these plants, not 4,000. Basically, there is so much coal on Earth that it cannot be accounted for by plant growth in 2,000 years, as there is just not enough land. There's several wildcard factors here. There was most likely more land available before the flood, and there is the possibility that some of the coal was produced by material other than plants. But ignoring that for the moment, there was an excellent article in Creation Technical Journal a few years back. Shevin had previously noted the unusual root arrangements of the lycopods, the scale trees, and concluded that the lycopods probably comprised a floating forest, which we do see today. Various plants will interlock their roots and make their own forest floor, which is floating on the water. Now, I've seen precisely what Shevin pointed out with the roots of the scale trees. They are unusual indeed. Often these scale trees are buried vertically in the rock layers. They are polystrate fossils. Poly for many, straight for the strata of rock that they cut through. Now, it is conventionally claimed that these trees were buried as they grew. But in 2003, I found this polystrate trunk, which had been buried upside down. Now, obviously it didn't grow this way. But of even more interest is that its roots appeared to be intertwined with another stump, which was now preserved above it. That would seem to lend support to the floating forest model. But the roots also tell another story that answers Kiwi Frog's most excellent question about how the plants are buried so deep. The roots, which are hollow woody tubes, have been crushed by extreme pressure provided by the sediments piled on top of them. The roots were obviously still soft when they were crushed, and the sediments had not yet turned to rock because they were compressed too. But to crush these roots takes enormous pressures, at the very least hundreds of meters of sediments piled on top, all before the roots turn to coal or the sediments turn to rock. Yet these roots are scattered throughout the 18,000 vertical feet represented at Joggins, showing that all 18,000 feet had to be rapidly deposited, so fast that the roots did not have a chance to turn to coal and the sediments did not have a chance to lithify into rock. The scale trees provide powerful evidence of a worldwide flood. In last week's show, I pointed out the discrepancy between the ages assigned by old Earthers to Grand Canyon. Using various old Earth dating methods, they arrived at ages of between 5 to 70 million years old. They were different by a factor of 14. Now, many people, apparently not grasping the point, angrily wrote in saying that a 4,000-year age we creationists assign is different by a factor of millions. Yeah? So? What does that have to do with it? That's completely irrelevant. Apparently you guys didn't understand my point. If the dating methods used to prove deep time cannot agree with each other, then they prove each other wrong. The reason for the discrepancy between the deep time ages and our young Earth ages is because the deep time ages are dead wrong. It's irrelevant what the discrepancy is between the young Earth age and the old Earth ages, because we're saying the old Earth ages are wrong. As I was previously citing in Crevo Rant number 100, when we use these conventional dating methods on rocks of known ages, the dates invariably come back far, far too old, usually out by factors in the millions. The methods of dating in deep time are just plain wrong. We had many more questions to cover, but I'm afraid we're out of time for this week. I'm your host, Ian Juby, signing off for now and thanking you for watching. Please join us again next Genesis week, assuming the end of the world isn't next week. Remember, you can send in your questions, comments, criticisms, and hate mail to us in a number of ways. Email us, send us a tweet, or leave a comment in the last show on our YouTube channel at genesisweek.com. Let us remember those words of comfort and warning from our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. We'll see you next week.
We need your support to help keep this program on the air. You can help by making a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, K2K 2P4. You can also sign up for Ian's newsletter, detailing current research and news items at ianjuby.org.